What you're going to discover tonight is I'm going to tell you something, and I'm going to tell it to you again, and I'm going to tell it to you again and again. I'm just going to show you the same thing over and over again in different ways. And yes, it is a good thing, right? It's helping you to, get it in your heads. So sort of, you'll start to see the pattern, and as you start to see the pattern, I want you to begin to call out on that. But before we do that, let's just, again, establishing a little bit more of that vocabulary at the cellular level, at the neuronal level, the level of the functional unit. We can talk about a few things. We can talk about the one nerve cell that extends out to innervate any single skeletal muscle, right? It's a one-cell system, right? From spinal cord to skeletal muscle. Sensory side is a one-cell system always, okay, except when you have a secondary receptor cell out at the ends, like those Merkel cells that are in the epidermis. But then once you get past that secondary receptor, it's all the way a nerve cell that travels the whole distance, all right? So sensory is always one cell. Likewise with visceral sensory, okay, one cell, all right? Motor, as we just said, somatic motor, one cell. But autonomic motor is a two-cell system, all right? And the first cell is called the preganglionic cell because the synapse point where it encounters the second cell, that synapse point is a ganglion, right? That's what a ganglion is, right? It's a synapse, or it's a cluster of cell bodies outside of the central nervous system, right? That's what a ganglion is. So you have the pre- and postsynaptic cells. That's part of the vocabulary we're going to be using tonight. When we talk about the sympathetic nervous system, I'm going to tell you the sympathetic is short-long, and what I mean by that is the preganglionic cell emerges from the central nervous system from the spinal cord. It's a short cell. Its synapse is just outside the central nervous system in a little chain of ganglia that runs on either side of the spinal cord or spinal column. And then, second cell is long. Goes all the way out to the effector. All right? Goes all the way out to the gland, all the way out to the heart, all the way out to the intestine. Okay? Converse, parasympathetic, long, short. All right? Preganglionic cell is long, emerging from cranial or sacral levels. Talk about that later. All right? Travels most of the way, and the ganglion is usually in the effector organ. All right? It's usually, you've already arrived at the organ, and then you've got this little extra short step. Okay? So, for now, again, I'm showing it to you now, but I'll show it to you again later. All right? And finally, we can begin to look at these neuronal pools, all right, which is where you have many neurons coming into a single neuron, or a single neuron or a few number of neurons going into many. And you see two examples down here of a converging circuit and a diverging circuit. These are only two examples of a neuronal pool. Your textbook gives you two other images. It's just so that you start to see that it isn't just, one cell to one cell, all right? The example on the left, let's think of something that would be like that, input and output, all right? So here's my example. Noontime, I make my soup over in the, over there. I boil some water and I pour it into the noodle thing, and then I carry it from where the hot water thing is to my office, all right? And that little plastic bowl does not insulate from the heat, so my fingers are absolutely burning, all right? And so there's a reflex arc that is telling me to do what? To let go, right? And at the same time, there's signals coming from my cerebrum that are saying, hold on, you don't want to spill it on the new carpet, all right? There you've got multiple inputs on the same motor neuron, right? And some are inhibitory and some are excitatory. Some are saying, don't stimulate the muscle, let it relax and drop it, and some, right? So that's what you have there in that first example of a converging circuit. Got it? All right. On the diverging side, you think about trying to actuate your hamstring. All right. Your hamstring is actually innervated by motor neurons. Remember, you have great big motor units here, right? Nerve cell and many muscle cells that they're innervating. But it turns out because those muscle groups are so big, the motor neurons are coming from several different levels in the spinal cord. Okay? So when I have a reflex arc that involves a great big muscle like that, I've got a small input, but I've got multiple outputs, all right, to actuate to get the entire muscle to work. Okay, you get it? All right. So those are just easy examples. All right. So we've looked at figures like this. We're going to do it again and again and again. But here it is. Again, now we're talking about peripheral. The peripheral nervous system, looking at the functional hierarchy here. And we've got our sensory side. We've talked about sensing external. So this is what we've referred to this as somatic sensory, right? And sensing internal, this is visceral sensory, all right? So just another diagram. I don't think this one I stole from somewhere else, all right? And then on the motor side of peripheral, this is peripheral being everything outside of the central nervous system, right? The other side, it's our motor efferents, which we can subdivide into somatic motor, which goes out to skeletal muscle in the carcass, right? And autonomic motor, which goes out to what? Subdivides into two parts. All right, first of all, autonomic motor is going to innervate smooth muscle, glands, heart muscle, right? And it's subdivided into sympathetic and parasympathetic. Sympathetic goes where? No, I don't mean specifically. Just generally. What? No. Again, parasympathetic goes where? It goes to the viscera. It only goes to the body cavity. All right? It only goes to the viscera. Okay? And beyond the body cavity, oh yeah, salivary glands. All right? A few other lacrimal glands. All right? A few glands that are up in your head. But mostly it's body cavity. Does it ever go to the carcass? Never. All right? Never goes to the carcass. I mean somatic tissue. I mean the outer tube. Remember going back to where we said the body is a tube within a tube? The inner tube is...
You can also mean arm?
Yes, that's part of your carcass.
Oh, it's not the carcass was here. So the carcass...
No, carcass is... Think of the zebra out there on the savannah, ravaged by the lion. The lion eats out the guts and leaves behind the carcass. Okay? The vultures are eating the carcass. All right? Okay? All right? So... Sympathetic never goes to the carcass. It's just viscera. What did I just say? Parasympathetic. Parasympathetic always to the viscera. Never goes to the carcass. Sympathetic goes to both. Right? It goes to the viscera, to your organs, and it's going out to the carcass because it's going to act on sweat glands. It's going to act on vascular muscle, vascular smooth muscle. Right? Control vasodilation, vasoconstriction. You want to control blood flow to your muscles out here in the carcass, Shelley, yes? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you're going to have sympathetic controlling that. And one of the Dr. D rules, vasomotor activity is always and only sympathetic. All right, so again, I'm going to be laying out rules. They're going to start to sink in, okay? All right, let's keep going. So when we look at the spinal cord, and we'll break it down into bits here in these upcoming figures, and we start to look again, now we're looking at peripheral nervous system. All right, we're going to start looking at it anatomically now. We'll start at the spinal cord. 31 pairs of spinal nerves, 8 cervical, 12 thoracic, 5 lumbar, 5 sacral, 1 coccygeal. All right, they're paired. Paired, meaning they're coming out on both sides bilaterally every time. When you look at this, you can appreciate the segmental nature of your body. You are segmented, all right? You don't see it from the outside, but from the inside you can see your segmentation. There are creatures where you can see their segmentation on the outside. Think of a lobster, right? Boom, boom, boom. Think of an earthworm. You can see those little rings, right? Segmentation is a pattern of body form that allows you to have very precise movement. Okay, so it's actually a refinement of muscular systems. All right, for movement to have segmented bodies. All right, and yours is segmented, but you don't see it from the outside because you have this smooth skin on the outside. All right, but it's segmented, and you can see it very nicely here at the level of the spinal cord. All right, or as we look at these at 31 pairs of spinal nerves. All right. When we look at the intercostal nerves, those nerves simply come out of the spinal cord at the thoracic levels, and they simply go out and innervate those intercostal muscles, all right? And they carry the nerves that go to the skin, the surface of the skin, all right? But when we look at the nerves emerging from thoracic, when you look at the nerves emerging from cervical, upper thoracic, lumbar, lower thoracic, lumbar levels, sacral levels, they emerge, the fibers emerge, and they mix with other levels from the spinal cord. And so they form plexi, all right? And you have the cervical plexus, all right? And you have the brachial plexus, and you have the lumbar plexus and the sacral plexus, all right? And a plexus is different from a ganglion, all right? A plexus is where nerve fibers from different levels merge with one another, okay? There's no synapses, though, so it's not a ganglion, all right? And so you just, if you look at these figures or you look in your text, you'll see that there's a real crisscrossing of fibers here in the cervical plexus, or here in the brachial plexus. You have a crisscrossing of fibers as they go out and go into your upper extremity, and likewise down here, the lumbosacral plexus, a bunch of fibers coming in from the lowest thoracic levels, from lumbar and sacral levels, and they're mixing with one another to form the actual nerves that are going down into your extremities, coming from multiple levels of the spinal cord. All right, so they plexi. All right. Another class, another time, you may have to learn what is contributing to each of these plexi and how they form and how they play out. You don't have to know that here, thankfully. All right, now. The only last thing is that all spinal nerves are mixed nerves. And a mixed nerve means it's both sensory and motor. Okay, it's both sensory and motor. And as you're going to see in a moment, that may include visceral sensory and that is autonomic sensory branch, and autonomic motor as well. And so we'll look at that in just a sec. So here's another cross-section then, or diagram of the spinal cord. Again, we said 31 pairs of spinal nerves, all right? And as you can see here, you see the cross-section of the spinal cord with its little gray matter on the inside and white matter around the outside, okay? It's the opposite of the way the brain is organized. The brain is gray matter outside, white matter inside, all right? And what is the gray matter indicating? It is cell bodies and synapses, right? If there's cell bodies, there's going to be synapses there, all right? So there's cell bodies and synapses. And when we look at the anatomical components here, we can talk about the dorsal root here, all right, coming in. The dorsal root is afferent. Dorsal root is afferent. It's sensory side, all right? Dorsal root coming in here. Well, let's go back. Let's go way out here. All right, we'll complete the loop. So this is the spinal nerve, right? It's a mixed nerve, all right? And when we get to this point here, we now have the divergence of afferent fibers and efferent fibers. Yes? Dorsal root is the afferent fibers. Cell bodies of those cells are sitting here in the dorsal root ganglion. We'll come back and look at another figure in a moment. They come into the spinal cord from the dorsal side, and this is called the dorsal horn. All right, as we look at the dark area, the gray area of the spinal cord, this is called the dorsal horn. This is the lateral horn. This is the ventral horn. All right, and so you see that anatomy. And the cell bodies for those motor neurons are going to be in the lateral and ventral horn. We'll look at it again in a moment in the next figure. And the efferent fibers then emerge and converge with the afferent fibers to form the spinal nerve. All right, and there's the spinal nerve. All right, so we have dorsal root and ventral root. All right, again, these are all, that makes them mixed nerves, right? They have motor and they have sensory. This is a better figure, and I like it a lot, all right, because it shows you not only the somatic components, but it shows you the autonomic components as well. So let's take a quick look at it. It's very simple, and I don't want to spend a lot of time on it. So again, repeating what we just did, here's somatic sensory with its cell body in the dorsal root ganglion, enters in. Here's the gray matter here. You see somatic comes in here where it's going to synapse with interneurons, possibly, if you have a polysynaptic reflex arc, all right? And then you're going to see the cell bodies of the motor neurons down here in the ventral root, okay, down here in the ventral root. This is the dorsal root up here, ventral root. This is the, sorry, you guys, dorsal horn, all right, ventral horn, and lateral horn, okay? And so we've got our sensory coming in here into the dorsal horn. We have synapses with interneurons, all right, and then down here in the ventral horn, you have the cell bodies of somatic motor. Cell bodies of somatic motor, all right? And you see it color-coded here. There it is. This red area is cell bodies of somatic motor, all right? And they emerge then through the ventral or anterior root, ventral root, all right? And they converge with the afferents, so we now have our mixed nerve out here. All right, now what I like about this figure is that it shows you that you also have autonomic. All right, here's your autonomic visceral component, autonomic visceral sensory cell bodies in the dorsal root ganglion. All right, we're going to synapse here, and we see the cell bodies for the motor component, right, in the lateral horn instead of in the ventral horn as they were for somatic. All right, so the motor component of autonomic, which in this case really is the motor component for sympathetic, all right, because it's going out to the carcass, okay, is traveling here along with the somatic motor, all right. And so when we look at this mixed nerve out here, all right, it is sensory, afferent, visceral, and somatic, right? It's sensory from the viscera. What is the viscera out here? The viscera is blood vessels and sweat glands, right? It's sensory, afferents, both autonomic and somatic. You have your synapses in the spinal cord, okay? And you have your output side, right? You have motor to somatic tissues, and you've got motor to visceral tissues, and they're traveling in the spinal nerves, all right? That's because they're going out to the carcass, all right? They're going out to the carcass. Okay. All right. Now, I am going to spend very little time on the cranial nerves because anything I say about them, you can simply read on your own, and if I say anything about them, you're not going to remember it right now anyway. All right, so I'm just going to introduce just a little bit. The cranial nerves are what? Those are part of the peripheral nervous system, where instead of emerging from one of those 31 pairs at spinal levels, they are emerging directly from the brain. Okay? That's all. All right? They are the same as spinal nerves, except they're emerging directly from the brain because you have a segmented body and they emerge in approximate level to the structures that are nearby. All right? And so as we work our way, sort of, if we think about our nervous system sort of beginning here and then working its way down, right? These things here, what's the very first cranial nerve is? The olfactory. So we work here and then we just start working our way back along the underside of the brain, as you see there. All right? You start working down along the underside of the brain, all right, working your way back. And as you work your way back, you're getting down through different structures. Eventually, what? You get to the, you have your optic nerve, and then you've got the couple of two or three really, that are controlling the muscles of the eye. All right, and then you continue on down, and eventually you're doing things that control your salivary glands in your mouth and your tongue and all that. And then eventually the last ones are down here sending things down into the visceral cavity, right, the 10th cranial nerve in particular. All right, so you've got these are paired. All right, again, it's bilateral, just like your spinal cord. It's paired. It's bilateral. It's symmetric. You have one coming to the right, one coming to the left. All right, and I've indicated to you here whether they are sensory or motor or both. All right? And so the S and the M refers to sensory or motor. I'd like you to learn, which is which, okay? I'd also like you to know, at the very least, these small indicators of where they're going or where they're coming from. All right, so this is an effort in memorization more than anything else. I've given you several mnemonics to work with. You can take your pick. On occasion, our trusty truck acts funny. Very good vehicle anyhow. That's a nice, safe one. All right, on old Olympus towering tops, the French and German viewed some hops. That's the one I grew up knowing. And then this is a new one from Duke University medical students. Odor of orangutan, terrified Tarzan after 40 voracious gorillas viciously attacked him. I think it's great, except I can never remember that. I'd need a mnemonic device just to remember that. Which I have one. Old Olympus towering tops would help me to remember the odor of anyway. So, and then there's some X-rated ones that we don't need to go into. All right, but you might prefer those, huh? You already know them. I don't want to hear it. Okay, I know. 0002 whatever. Okay. So take a look at these, know these, and let's move on, okay? All right, so now I want to get down to what I sort of said at the beginning. We're going to look at the organization of the autonomic nervous system, and we're going to learn the rules, all right, that govern this system. We're going to learn the actions of this system, all right? And it's very sensible, all right? Once you decide that you have to accept the architecture, but it's very consistent, and once you get hold of the rules, it almost becomes, at least for much of it, fairly intuitive as you think about somatic versus autonomic, as you think about the two branches of autonomic. So sort of try to, not be overwhelmed, but walk into it slowly, all right? So let's get somatic motor out of the way. And we've already done some of that, right? It's a one-cell system, yes? We're talking about sensory or motor here. Let's focus on motor. All right. Let's just focus on motor here. We won't worry about the sensory side. All right. Somatic, going out to the carcass only. Yes. All right. Just check it off. Just give me a thumbs up or a nod or stick your tongue out at me. Do something. All right. One cell system. Right. It's a one-cell system. Goes from the central nervous system all the way out to the skeletal muscle. One-cell system. If it's a one-cell system, do you need ganglia? There, no ganglia. It's excitatory only, which means to get the muscle to contract, you stimulate the nerve. And if you don't want the muscle to contract, you don't do anything. Another way to say that is you don't have inhibitory influence. You can't send a signal to the muscle to tell it to relax. You simply don't say anything, right? It's only excitatory. Another way to say it is, all you have is a gas pedal. You do not have a brake pedal here, right? To slow it down, what do? Just take your foot off the gas, all right? That's it. All right, so it's excitatory. It only innervates skeletal muscle, all right? You know the connection point is the neuromuscular junction. We've talked about that. It is voluntary or reflexive, right? It's voluntary or reflexive, okay? All somatic motor neurons are myelinated, which tells you it's fast conduction, right? That makes sense, doesn't it? All right, this is your outer tube. This is the control system for the outer tube, the muscles, the skeletal muscle for movement. That's what the outer tube is about, right? You go back to the first or second lecture I gave you, right? You're a tube within a tube. The outer tube is all about movement. You want that to be responsive. So it's myelinated, which means fast conduction, and you can have somatic motor emerging from cranial levels as the third cranial nerve or the fourth cranial nerve that control your movements of your eyes, as an example. The cranial nerve that controls your tongue. That's all skeletal muscle. And the neurotransmitter at the neuromuscular junction is always acetylcholine. Okay? So pretty straightforward. We won't say much more about somatic other than to just come back and reiterate those very same points again in some other diagram. All right, now, autonomic, let's consider both branches of autonomic together for the moment. So we get a general set of rules, and then we'll subdivide as we break it into the two parts, all right? So autonomic, it's a two-cell system. We're going to see a pre- and a postganglionic, which means there's going to be a ganglion. There's going to be a synapse out there in the periphery, right? We say a ganglion, we mean a synapse out in the periphery, all right? These are going to be located variously, either on either side of the spinal column, all right? is a chain of ganglia that's for use by the sympathetic nervous system. It's called the sympathetic chain or the sympathetic trunk. All right. It's also called the paravertebral ganglion. All of those refer to exactly the same thing. A chain of ganglia running all the way down the length of your spine. All right. Just outside the central nervous system, just outside the spinal cord. All right. And that is the synapse point for sympathetics, because sympathetics are short, long. So that short goes right out of the spinal cord, boom, it's hardly 2 inches long, done. And then there's the synapse, and the second goes the rest of the way, the postganglionic. All right? So, alternatively, you're going to have, especially for parasympathetic, but not entirely, you're going to have long, short. And if it's long, short, what does that mean? There's a ganglia somewhere out there. And if it's parasympathetic, you know parasympathetic is always in the visceral cavity. Therefore, you're going to have ganglia in the wall of organs. That will be the synapse point. And then you'll have the second nerve cell will be short, right? Okay, so effectors, easy. Smooth muscle, that means the gut, that means blood vessels, right? That means uterus. That means vas deferens. That, you know, all those smooth muscle structures out there, right? The ureters, okay? The bladder, all those things, smooth muscle, right? And cardiac muscle and glands, right? So all the stuff that you don't have voluntary control over, all right? Okay. Whole organ is reactive. I don't know what I mean by that. Involuntary, right? You don't have voluntary control, all right? Sorry, Brittany. All right. Slow. The preganglionic is myelinated. The postganglionic is not. All right? The preganglionic is myelinated. The postganglionic is not. Okay. What I mean by whole organ reactive is that you are actuating an entire organ at the time. All right, so you are acting on the heart to speed it up, and you've got autonomics that are acting throughout the organ. You're trying to speed up the actions of the gut because you're digesting food. The whole organ is activated. Okay, all right. These are going to emerge from cranial and sacral levels, but there's a very clean subdivision, and we'll come back to that in a moment. But all we're saying right now is from all levels of the central nervous system, you're going to see some autonomic fibers emerging. All right? And then we're going to see acetylcholine always as the preganglionic neurotransmitter, or as the neurotransmitter released by the preganglionic neuron at the synapse, at the ganglia. It's always going to be acetylcholine. And if it's parasympathetic, the postganglionic is also going to release acetylcholine. So it's acetylcholine, right? Pre and postganglionic. Okay? And if it's sympathetic, it's acetylcholine released from the preganglionic and norepinephrine released from the postganglionic. Okay? So pre and post, all right? Acetylcholine for parasympathetic, acetylcholine, norepinephrine for sympathetic. No. We're going to come back to it again. All right, so here you see, again, the two-cell system then, all right, versus the one-cell system. So here's somatic motor, one-cell system all the way out to the effector. Here's autonomic. There's your coming out of the ventral horn, ventral root, all right, in the mixed nerve here, and we have our synapse. This is our autonomic ganglion here, and then there's your postganglionic. And as you can see here, acetylcholine is the neurotransmitter for somatic motor neurons. Acetylcholine is the neurotransmitter released from the preganglionic at the autonomic ganglion, right here. All right? And in the case of parasympathetic, you're going to have acetylcholine released from the postganglionic, and in the case of sympathetic, you're going to have norepinephrine released from the postganglionic. Okay? All right. So that's an easy one, and I guess if we take another look at at the effectors here again. So you've got smooth muscle, you've got heart muscle, you've got gland. Those are your effectors there. So that's all easy. Okay. All right. Again, pre- and post-ganglionic. Nothing new here, you guys. As I say, nothing to see here. Okay. All right. So that's just a reiteration of what we've just said. So now we're going to subdivide. All right. And we've been already hinting at the differences between these, so you should begin to be fairly comfortable with these. But let's start to get now into the specifics of parasympathetic and sympathetic. All right. It's always bilateral, meaning it's always going to be meted out symmetrically. You're going to have one nerve going to the right, one nerve going to the left. There's always, everything's paired. Everything is paired. You forget that sometimes, all right? You think about the vagus nerve, all right, and you think about what? A nerve going down. It's bilateral, all right? It's bilateral. Everything is bilateral. And you've got one for the right half and one for the left half, all right? Most organs are dually innervated, meaning they have innervation from parasympathetic and they have innervation from sympathetic, all right? And as you know, parasympathetic is often referred to as controlling normal body maintenance, is a simple way to say it. Or I like to say it's responsible for R&R, which you think of as rest and relaxation, but I think of it as rest and rumination, all right, as in digesting food, all right? It's your normal body maintenance, okay? And you can now become intuitive on this, right? So what's it going to do to your digestive tract? Up or down? Speed it up, slow it down. Come on. Speed it up. All right, what's it going to do to your heart? Slow it down. What's it going to do to your pupils? Constrict. I want to go to sleep. I don't want much light going in. All right? All right? So you can start to put that all together, all right? They almost always behave antagonistically, all right? So they almost always do opposites. So sympathetic is responsible for managing stress, more commonly referred to as the fight or flight response, all right? It's for managing stress. And so heart rate, up. Iris of the eye, open it up, all right? Digestive activity, slow it down. Production of saliva, down, right? You're worried, mouth is dry, right? You're eating a meal, mouth is wet, right? So it's a lot of it is intuitive, all right? And the hypothalamus is sort of trying to balance these two, all right? Okay. So let's begin to look now at some of the distinctions, all right? And we've said many of these before, but there's some new ones. So rest and digest, or rest and rumination for parasympathetic, okay? And now we start to see a very significant anatomical difference between them, and that is that parasympathetic emerges from cranial, meaning they may be carried in cranial nerves, all right? And there's only 4 cranial nerves that carry parasympathetic, but if they're to be carried, they're going to be either emerging with cranial nerves or at sacral levels, all right, from sacral 2 and 3, all right, or 2 through 4, 2 3 4, all right. So it is cranial and it is sacral, all right. That's it. You're thinking about those autonomic motor fibers on the parasympathetic side. They're either coming out with cranial nerves from the central nervous system or they're emerging at sacral levels. That's it, up here or down here. So when we think about the digestive tract, for example, all right, the vagus nerve, the 10th cranial nerve, controls all that digestive activity. In fact, that 10th cranial nerve is pretty spectacular because it's doing everything in the body cavity, all right, that's parasympathetic until you get to the descending colon. All right, once you get to descending colon, you're already far enough south in the digestive tract, if you think of it as a linear digestive tract instead of all curled up, right? Think of it as linear. You're at the very last segment. You're going to have to bring in some sacral level parasympathetics because the vagus has paid itself out by the time we get that far down the digestive tract. All right, so when you get to the end of the digestive tract or you get down into the floor of the body cavity, down in the perineum, talking about the bladder and so forth. It's sacral levels, all right? What did we say? Point and shoot, parasympathetic. For erectile tissue, that's also coming from sacral levels, okay? All right, so myelinated, unmyelinated, right? Long, short. First one, long. Vagus nerve then is what? Pre or postganglionics? The vagus nerve is preganglionics until it gets into the organ, and then there'll be a ganglion there right in the organ, and then there'll be the little short postganglionic. And the first one, the preganglionic, is myelinated. That's a long myelinated bunch of nerves, all right? First one is myelinated. The second short one is unmyelinated, all right? ACH, we good with that? Acetylcholine at the preganglionic, acetylcholine at the effector, right? Dr. D rule. There's two Dr. D rules, okay? This one is parasympathetic never leaves the visceral cavity, all right? Right? And the other Dr. D rule is sympathetic controls all vasomotor, including the periphery, right? Including in the carcass, okay? Parasympathetic ever go into the carcass? No, right? Sympathetic takes care of all vasomotor, including in the carcass. Okay, those are what I call the two Dr. D rules. All right. Okay, terminal ganglia and then in or near the effector. We've already said that. And there's no mass discharge, which means that this nerve is targeting particular parts, particular parts of the body, but you can't just say blast out parasympathetic to the entire body. Okay. But if I'm in a fight or flight response, sympathetic response, and I want to open up blood vessels in some parts of the body and close off blood vessels in other parts of the body, I want it all working together, right? I want all of it coming together. It's fight or flight. I'm not going to just say, I think I'll just have a little bit of a sympathetic. You're just going to do the whole thing. You want everything responding. And so you have this thing called mass discharge, right? But that's only on the sympathetic side, and it makes sense. For parasympathetic, you can modulate, right? You can decide what you're going to activate and what you're not. So there's no mass discharge on that side. All right. Sympathetic now. Fight or flight. And the fibers do not ever emerge from cranial levels. All right. They emerge from thoracic and lumbar levels. All right. Now, are there structures up here that require sympathetic innervation? Okay, your eye, your salivary glands, okay, those are all good things. The blood vessels that are all over the place here, all right. Where does sympathetic emerge from? Thoracic and lumbar levels. And so what happens here is that you have the preganglionic come out of the spinal cord, go into the sympathetic chain, right there outside, and then go up the sympathetic chain and synapse somewhere high up, even at cervical levels, right? Synapse, and then you have the postganglionic going the rest of the way, and it'll connect up with some other nerve and just trying to travel with some nerve that's in the vicinity, all right? So it emerges from the spinal cord at thoracic and lumbar levels. It emerges from the spinal cord there. But once it goes into the sympathetic chain, it can ascend all the way up to cervical. It can go all the way down to the end of your spinal column, to the end of your spinal cord, all right, traveling in that sympathetic chain. All right, so it has total access. But where did the fibers originally emerge from the central nervous system? Thoracic and lumbar, period. All right? Once they get into the sympathetic chain, they can ride the elevator up or down, and the whole body can benefit from them. All right? But the preganglionic fibers only emerge at thoracic and lumbar levels. Short, long, all right, because the second fiber is always going to be long. It's going the distance, all right. Acetylcholine from the first, norepinephrine from the second, right? Norepinephrine is going to be released onto the target tissue, all right? And as we've said, it's going into viscera, right? You're going to slow down digestive activity. You're going to speed up the heart. Okay. So you've got visceral control there. All right. And it's also out to the carcass for vasomotor and sweat glands. All right. For sweat glands. All right. And as we said, where's the ganglion here? It's short. The ganglion is the sympathetic chain of ganglia, sympathetic trunk, paravertebral ganglia, all synonyms for the same thing. All right? Okay. There are a few instances where the synapse is not in the sympathetic chain. All right? And we're not going to discuss those because there are only a few instances of those. And in those cases, they're called collateral ganglia. They're in the visceral cavity, all right, and they're not paired. There's just one of them, all right? Okay, let's not worry about those. And you have mass discharge possible. So this, you activate sympathetic, and what are you getting? You're getting soup to nuts. You're getting it top to bottom, right? You're getting the whole. Sympathetic is just a sympathetic response. Everything is in motion, right? Okay. All right. So we're getting good at looking at the same thing over and over again. Right? Hopefully it's starting to stick. All right. Parasympathetic responses. So what can we say? They normally dominate over sympathetic impulses, meaning there's a lot more parasympathetic activity going on most of the time. All right, then there is sympathetic, which is saved for those stressful conditions. All right, rest and digest activities. We've said normal body maintenance. Right, normal body maintenance. All right, mechanisms that help conserve, restore body energy during times of rest. This is just it's taking care of you. Right, it's making sure you have the energy reserves that you need. All right, you're storing away stuff. You're keeping everything in a state of homeostasis. All right. The various responses, SLUDD, SLUD, salivation, lacrimation, urination, digestion, defecation. All right, that's stuff that you already know. Decreases heart rate. Make sense? Decreases the diameter of the airway. Make sense? Maybe not so much intuitive on the parasympathetic side, but if I said, what is sympathetic going to do to the airway? That makes sense, doesn't it? Open it up, give you more air, right? So close it down with parasympathetic. Diameter of the pupils, close them down, all right? And it's also going to pull on the ciliary muscle to change the shape of the lens, right? And it's going to allow you to have near vision, right, versus distance vision, okay? All right. This is an important thing, this final bit here, you guys. Generally, short-term responses, right, due to removal of acetylcholine by acetylcholine esterase. So parasympathetic doesn't have long-term sort of effect, which means it constantly has to be on. That's it. It constantly has to be on, right? It constantly has to be active, all right? It doesn't have a sustained sort of effect, all right? You'll see the opposite is true when we look at sympathetic. Okay, so again, think of it what's intuitive. All right, so sympathetic dominates during periods of emotional stress. Right, the emergency situations, emergency, embarrassment, excitement, exercise. All right, those are all sympathetic conditions. Right, they're all stressful in different ways. You don't think of exercise as stressful, but it is. It's the same thing you do when you're running away from some challenging situation or whatever. All right. So fight or flight then. Dilation of the pupils, makes sense? Opening up, giving you more light, increased heart rate, increased blood flow to muscles, decreased blood flow to non-essential organs. All right. This goes back to what your mother always said. You don't go in the pool till what? 30 minutes. They've shrunk it down. It was 45 when I grew up. Maybe you're just different than I am. So, whatever it is, right? You don't go in the pool until 30 minutes after you eat. Why? because you've just eaten and parasympathetic is active and you've got a lot of food in the digestive tract and you've got a lot of blood going into the digestive tract, and all that activity means there isn't blood for other parts of the body. All right? Now you dive into thing. You are now in a stressful situation. You want blood for the rest of the system, right? And where are you going to get it from? I'm going to close off blood supply and diminish the activity in the gut, and now you've got this competing thing there. I've got a belly full of food, but I've got no blood there to supply oxygen to the organ that's needing to digest that food. So what are you going to do with that food? You're going to get rid of it, right? You're going to vomit, all right, to get rid of it because you can't keep it there, all right? And that, otherwise you're going to be using oxygen to help move those muscles and digest. So that's why you don't go swimming, right? You don't want to be vomiting in the pool and drowning. All right. So blood flow to skeletal, cardiac muscle makes sense. All right. Dilating the airway, increasing respiratory rate, increasing blood glucose levels. And what we're saying here is that sympathetic actually has a role in liberating energy stores. All right. Raise blood sugar, release fat from its stores. All right. It is making sure that your tissues have the energy source that they need in order to manage the stressful condition. All right. Decrease intestinal activity, inhibit urination. All right. And as we said before, ejaculation. Right. Parasympathetic is erection, and sympathetic is ejaculation. All right. Long lasting due to lingering of norepinephrine at the synapses. All right. And as you're going to see, and as I'm going to tell you in a moment, well, let's just go to it, all right? I think, yeah, let's go to it right here. So your adrenal gland, all right. Neural crest. What a perfect way for me to end. All right, my favorite of the what? Of the primary germ cell tissues, right? Ectoderm, endoderm, mesoderm. And some people, I told you, like to consider neural crest cells the fourth of the embryonic stem cell tissues, or it's really derived from ectoderm, all right? That tissue, neural crest cells, are the only one of those four tissues that is exclusive to vertebrates, all right? And this makes you special. It means that you have the postganglionic autonomics, which do not exist in other creatures. All right, so you have this incredible system that's all these postganglionic cells, and it also means, among other things, that you have an adrenal gland, where the adrenal medulla is the postganglionic cells. All right, for sympathetic, going to the adrenal gland, all right, the adrenal medulla is the postganglionic cells. What's the neurotransmitter released from postganglionic nerve cells in the sympathetic? Norepinephrine. Well, guess what? Guess what the adrenal gland releases? It releases epinephrine and norepinephrine. All right? So the adrenal gland is the postganglionics, and that's part of what sustains this response, is that it's not only that you have norepinephrine sticking around in the synapse longer, it isn't broken down as quickly as acetylcholine is for parasympathetic, but it's also because you have the preganglionics acting on the adrenal gland, and the adrenal gland in turn is releasing epinephrine, all right, 85% epinephrine and 15% norepinephrine, and you can use the British terms adrenaline and noradrenaline, all right, same deal, adrenaline and epinephrine, same thing. Noradrenaline and norepinephrine, same thing. So, again, the adrenal medulla is the postganglionic cells, all right, in this case. But instead of releasing them into a synapse, instead of releasing their neurotransmitter into a synapse, they are releasing their neurotransmitter into the blood. And that's why it can have that big effect, right? That whole body effect, because you're releasing that essentially that neurotransmitter in the form of a hormone, and it's washing over everything, isn't it? So all those blood vessels throughout the whole body are going to are going to be affected. You have that whole mass action effect going on there. All right, makes total sense. All right, so so we really okay. So the preganglionic in this case, this is one of the examples where the preganglionic does not synapse in the sympathetic chain, right? It can't. It just goes through the sympathetic chain and back out again, and it goes to the adrenal gland, and the synapse is with the cells of the adrenal medulla, all right? So there you have no synapse there. Instead, it goes directly to those cells. Okay, and it circulates the hormone. All right, so here we go. We've just looked at, we've just defined or described this thing then. Again, here it's showing us the neurotransmitters for parasympathetic, right? Acetylcholine and acetylcholine, right? Pre and post. All right, and sympathetic, acetylcholine and norepinephrine. So there it is again. All right. So this is our last figure, and it's the perfect place to stop. This is the figure you should tattoo on your forehead, and it really is this, you know, the old adage, a picture's worth 1,000 words. This is the one. This is where you want to park yourself for a while and just appreciate everything that's on this figure. All right, let's break it down. What we see here is what? Parasympathetics emerging from cranial levels. There's only 4 cranial nerves that carry them, all right, but that's still cranial levels, all right. And you can see some of the actions: constricting the pupils, stimulating salivary glands, slowing down the heart. And which is this one right here? That's the vagus, right? Slowing down the heart, acting on the lungs, acting on the digestive tract, right? Closing down the airway, stimulating digestive activity, all right, stimulating activity of the pancreas, give me some of those digestive juices, right, and stimulating the gallbladder, release those bile salts, all right. Emerging from cranial and down here, sacral levels, right, your bladder, all right, is controlled down at these sacral levels. Erection, as we said, all right, down from these sacral levels, okay. And finally, long, short. Right? You see it there in the figure. Long, short. Good? It's all there. We've said it all already. All right? The other side of the figure, you have the sympathetic chain here. All right? And remember, it's bilateral. You've got one on each side. All right? This figure is just meant to keep it simple. All right? And so we have short, long. Right? And you can see that they emerge from thoracic and lumbar levels. All right? They enter into the sympathetic chain, but then they can go all the way up, okay, and can supply structures in your head, all right. Even though they don't emerge from cranial levels, they can operate on cranial things like the pupil of the eye or salivary gland secretion, all right. And they're going to be antagonistic. So we close down the bronchi here, we relax the smooth muscle of the bronchi here, we open the airway, right. We slow down the heart on parasympathetic. We accelerate the heart with sympathetic. All right. We inhibit digestive activity. We inhibit pancreatic activity. Antagonistic, antagonistic, antagonistic. Right. They're just doing opposites. Okay. Acting on the liver. All right. We're going to stimulate glucose release from the liver. And watch. Look at this one here. Any synapse? Goes right through the sympathetic chain and back out again. It literally loops through it and goes back out again. All right, and here it travels and it synapses on the cells of the adrenal medulla. That releases adrenaline. That gives you that mass, full body effect. All right, and way down here again, thoracic and lumbar levels. We have, oh, what's this? This is a collateral ganglion. All right, this is one of those synapse points that's outside of, all right, this, you have one here. This is called the celiac ganglion here, all right. Don't make a big deal out of these. I'm not at all going to test you on that particular feature, but it's good to recognize that the general pattern is short-long. The synapse is almost always in the paravertebral ganglion, but there are a few instances where you have unpaired sympathetics coming in to these collateral ganglia outside the sympathetic chain, They synapse, and then you have a short postganglionic from that synapse point. It's not going to be as short as these parasympathetics. It generally isn't like right there in the wall of the organ, right? But nevertheless, you have a synapse out in the periphery, a ganglion, all right, and that's all applying to things in the visceral cavity, all right? Things that are out here in the carcass, what did we say? They come out of the spinal cord, they go into the sympathetic chain, all right? They synapse, the postganglionic joins into the spinal nerve, right? The sympathetic joins into the spinal nerve. You already knew that. I told you. Sympathetic motor to the carcass is going to travel in the spinal nerve. I showed you that already on that earlier figure. Okay? There it is. Okay, so